Tahmina Watson, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Seattle. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about how immigration contributes to innovation and economic growth and the future of immigration law. Now, this is a really hot topic. Sometimes it's a really politically charged topic because people get really passionate when they're talking about immigration. And oftentimes we throw around terms of like illegal immigration, etc. I don't want to make this political. Like, I don't think it needs to be a political thing really at all. Like, we're just talking about the push and pull of economies. We're talking about how we have labor supply and demand issues and how we're trying to drive economic growth and how labor contributes to that and to innovation. And so taking the politics out of it, just like what does it look like to drive economic growth and innovation via labor, and uh, how can we address that via immigration law? That's how we're going to be exploring that together today with our conversation. As we get started, I wanted to share a little bit about Tahmina with everybody. Named a top immigration attorney for startups in America by Business Insider, Tahmina Watson is a nationally recognized expert in U.S. immigration law, specializing in the visa needs of global entrepreneurs. She founded Watson Immigration Law in Seattle in 2009, successfully supporting hundreds of startups and generating millions in business investments. Watson also founded the nonprofits Airport Lawyers and the Washington Immigrant Defense Network. Watson is a sought-after industry expert, speaker, and media spokesperson with appearances in Bloomberg, Forbes, NPR, and CNN. Now, I could go on, Tahmina, but I'm going to pause there. Anything else you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we go on further?
Well, I want to maybe tell people that I'm an immigrant to the United States myself. I'm a naturalized citizen. I have two children who are American, and sometimes I feel as though I'm listening to Tom and Jerry on a cartoon because I grew up with the American accent on television through cartoons. But I'm American through and through at this point, and I just love everything about what I do and the impact that I make on people's lives.
Yeah, I love that. And I appreciate your background and your expertise here and your willingness to share that with me and my audience today. Now, let's go ahead and unpack a little bit around this idea of how immigration contributes to innovation and economic growth. That in and of itself is a really big idea. Um, Now, if we take a step back in time and if we just look like historically at the United States, for example, as a country of immigrants, we can go back in time, a couple hundred years to the founding of the United States. We're a country of immigrants. Walk us through that a little bit. We don't need to go into like a deep history lesson here, but what is your understanding about the historical precedents for the United States as a country of immigrants, and how even over the last 50 years, how immigration has helped to fuel economic growth and this type of this innovation into the new age of entrepreneurship and labor as we've transitioned from agricultural economies to industrial economy to now really a predominantly service sector, financial sector kind of focused economic system here in the United States.
John, I'm so glad that you're talking about the historical perspective of immigrant contributions. And, I won't go back all the way to when the Constitution was written, but let's just talk about the early 1900s and late 1800s. The East Coast and West Coast were not necessarily connected without the railroads. Who put those in place. Yeah. And at that time we had those immigration laws that came in, really trying to make sure that we had the labor to connect the two parts of the country through the railroads. Who did those? It was the immigrants. And once we had the railroads in place, suddenly we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. We've had this tug of war, if you like, of needing help, getting the help, and then not necessarily appreciating the help. But America really is a nation of immigrants. And, whoever is listening to this, and if you're in America, it might make sense to maybe just go back into your family history and see, was there anybody who actually arrived on the Mayflower? And dig through those history with your grandparents or great grandparents, or even your parents, to understand where did your heritage, what is your heritage, because it helps you understand the diversity that we have in this country, even if you may not think that you're part of that diversity, because your parents arrived on the grandparents arrived on the Mayflower, and now there's this political divide. But we're all immigrants, whether we arrived yesterday or we arrived 100 years ago, and it's really important to remember that. But then let's come back to how immigrants have shaped this country. I've written a number of books, and all of these books start with a little bit of history so that my clients can understand what, their backgrounds and, their grandparents and their families might have contributed to America, but how the fabric of America has been shaped by immigrants. So, all of us know Nordstrom, the wonderful shop where we go and buy beautiful things. But Nordstrom was an immigrant. If you think about going to Disneyland, Disney was a second generation immigrant. If you think about Levi's jeans, Levi's was an immigrant. If you think about New York as a city of tall buildings, those tall buildings were possible because of the steel that was manufactured in a cheaper way by, I forget his name, but he was an immigrant from Scotland. And so if you think about each element of our country, immigrant contributions start from the very beginning, and I talk about John Rolfe in one of my books about, how he brought seeds for tobacco into this country. That really was the genesis of trade. That really began the economic development in this country. So that's history. But what about today? And if people think about COVID and our lives that were stuck within the four walls of our homes, how did we survive? It was Zoom that allowed us to have schooling, that allowed us to have doctor's appointments, that allowed us to continue business. Zoom was created by a Chinese immigrant to the United States. If people think about their phones, just look at the phone. If you are listening right now, take your phone out, look at it. The hardware, the software, the network, all of those are being predominantly maintained by high-skilled immigrant workers. You mentioned something really interesting about, the political divide and how it becomes an issue of conflict. It's because the news is often talking about the areas of immigration that are emotionally charged. Yeah. But immigration is meant to be about labor. The work that I do is not the sexy kind of work. It's really the work that is fueling the economy. And so if you think about immigration, it's really totally supposed to be about economics. But when you're listening to it in the news, you're not necessarily getting that perspective all the time.
Yeah, super interesting. And like you said, we all are, to one extent. If you go back far enough, we're all immigrants. I do have ancestors that came over on the Mayflower. I am a straight cisgender white dude. I have all the privileges in the world. But if I go back far enough, I'm an immigrant. Like, my family are immigrants. And then later on, I have other lines of my family that came over in the 1800s and the mid 1800s, other waves of immigrants that came over from England and Britain, etc. Like, so I'm not a person of color. I don't have claim to immigrant status from those groups or those races or ethnicities. But yes, I too, my family came from immigrant families, right? And we all do. And we can, all of us, trace back at some point some form of immigrant status where we came and we contributed, and we helped to contribute to the homesteading. We helped contribute to the local economies, whether that was farming or building up the industrial base or whatever, right? And nowadays we're not talking about, usually at least, we're not talking about farming. We're not talking about even factories or such. We're often talking about coming and either being an employee at a company or starting a small business or even doing something more technical or being in a service-based job or whatever. Those are the types of jobs people tend to be in more, commonly today. Either way, we still need workers. We still, we have dramatic labor shortages in the U.S. So as we're looking at how do we fill the labor shortages, we have skill gaps across major skills gaps across many industries. How do we fill these shortages and gaps? One way is through innovation, one way is through automation, another way is through immigration, right? And yet we continue, because of polarization and because of politicalization, because of demonization, like oftentimes we can't have real conversations about common sense approaches to immigration policy that can make it possible to at least, one prong, one leg of that stool to have an approach to where we can actually fill, that skills gap or, address the challenge that we are facing. So I want to take the rest of our time to talk about the future of immigration law and immigration policy and what you see as some of the ways that we could take a step forward to, in responsible ways, really make sure that, we can be a nation that welcomes highly skilled individuals who can come and contribute and make sure that we have the best and the brightest to fill the jobs that need to be filled so that we can continue to innovate and grow our economy and provide the products and services that everyone needs around the world.
Mm-hmm. John, I think what you've really hit on the nail is the shortage of labor. And it doesn't matter which industry you're in, there's a shortage everywhere, high skilled, low skilled, you name it. And I think COVID was a really interesting time in history to have all of this exposed in a way that we hadn't seen before. So, for years, I've had nursing home owners, construction company owners, different types of industry leaders come to me who don't necessarily need high skilled workers, but they need people who have skills in these types of work. One particular construction company owner said to me, Tahmina, I hired somebody and they didn't even know which way the hammer should be used. Is it this way or that way? And she said, I went to Jamaica and I found this person who could actually, build houses and I really want him to come. Oh, but there's no visa for that. And, what we have is a visa system that was created in the 1950s with an update in the 1990s. And it's not suitable for the world that we live in at the moment. In 2024, when we have all different types of technology revolutions, we have business evolution, we have globalization, and America in many ways still is the center of the world. And if that's the case, we need to keep up with what the world needs, except our Congress is not necessarily making the laws stay in touch with the practical realities of the needs of businesses and the economics of the country. So coming back to what do we need to have comprehensive immigration reform that deals with every aspect of immigration. When we talk about one element of immigration reform, and let's say right now in the news, people are probably hearing about asylum changes and, giving visas for undocumented spouses or green cards or pathway to some sort of work permit for undocumented spouses. This is what is in the news right now. But you can't fix one side of immigration without fixing all the other sides. It's sort of like having the knee bone connected to the hip bone that's connected to the rest of the body. And if you are only fixing the hip bone, your body is still lopsided. It's not going to be fixed. And that's what we have with immigration. And that's why comprehensive immigration reform is necessary. Now, if you think about what the Biden administration has done with policy updates, because laws are not being updated through Congress, those policies are not necessarily understood by the layperson or getting traction in the news or understanding the immigration intersection of those. So like the CHIPS Act, that is amazing. We need chips for every aspect of technology, but who is going to do the manufacturing or the creation? I mean, I'm a layperson too, but we need the high-skilled folks to do that. With the AI executive order, it talks about needing high-skilled immigrants to help with that. We don't have enough visa categories or the visa system to be able to manage what is necessary. So to answer your question in a nutshell, comprehensive immigration reform is absolutely essential to take us to the next generation of what this country should be. As a mother of 2 children, and who's an immigrant who has, fallen in love with everything that this country can give to people like me and everybody else, I want my children to be able to grow up and live in a country that's going to flourish. But if we are not responsible as adults and the gatekeepers of what is necessary, what kind of future will our children have?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine because we take it for granted, right? And we've had so much exponential innovative growth. Like I think about, I don't remember the source, but there's an organization that puts out like every year their productivity reports, and we have year over year productivity increases. And it goes up so much every year that we're able to make up for a lot of the gap that we have in the labor shortage. But there's only so long we can keep up with that. Like AI is great. Advanced robotics is great. Like the fact that we can do more with less and that we're more and more productive all the time, that's fantastic. I love that for us. But we're never going to keep up enough with just productivity gains through innovation that we don't need more people. We need more people. We need more actual skilled workers. And in the US, we do not produce enough skilled workers across these various industries. We just don't. And name the industry, name the skilled category of skilled worker, and we do not produce enough. Like you go to any university, you aggregate it, you say how many engineers do we produce in a year, or how many doctors do we produce in a year, or whatever, name the one. We do not produce enough in that category to keep up with the demand, period. Right. And even if you assume continued exponential growth in our productivity gains, we do not produce enough. So we have to find a way to get past ourselves in the polarization around, these sticky political issues, and or at least how it's been politicized, and make common sense reforms to allow for common sense, immigration law, that we can have visas and we can have other approaches to citizenship or whatever, so that we can allow people to enter this country and to work and contribute. People want to come, they want to contribute. And why are we stopping them? Why are we not allowing that to happen? That's something that I continue to scratch my head about. And the answer is fear mongering. I can't get past that. I think it literally is just fear mongering.
And you're right.
Yeah.
And I want to pick up on something you said, John. You mentioned, we don't have the skilled workers, and you're spot on about the doctors and the engineers. And if you go to these universities, you will see that the students that are actually taking these courses are not necessarily from here. They're often foreign students.
Yeah.
And just taking a recent example, I live in Seattle. We have the headquarters of many Fortune 100 companies here, and everybody's aware of the layoffs that we've seen in recent history, starting from 2022. And what was really interesting is, in the last couple of years, I'd say in the last 12 months, other countries are really appreciating our lack of laws to keep these people because it's competitive.
Yeah.
And if you think about, let's say there is a big company that laid off 18,000 people in one news cycle, and those people were responsible for preparing that product. You talked about productivity. They created products. They have the skill set to do that, and now suddenly, for whatever reason, they're being laid off. And Canada comes in and says, oh, you know what? We could use that skill. So we are going to create a visa category called H-1B visas. Now, H-1B, for those who don't know, is one of our most popular visa categories for people who have degrees and are professionals. And there's a very competitive process in getting these visas. But Canada said, we are going to take all of these people, and they created a pathway looking at that. So Canada's always watching us. And whenever we are at a stationary point, or, at a point where they could just step in and provide, an attractive option for skilled immigrants, they are always doing that. So in one day, when they had 10,000 openings, those 10,000 slots were gone within less than 24 hours, because people are like, well, I might as well just go there. The other thing is that often, and I know that you probably have covered non-compete agreements, often these companies will have non-compete agreements, but those non-competes are jurisdictional. Canada doesn't care about it. So you can take all of that knowledge and skill and apply it to a Canadian company and let that grow. The UK recently had a new policy, a new law that said if you are a graduate, they listed a whole number of universities, but majority of them were in America, Stanford and Berkeley and what have you. And they said, if you graduate, we're not going to ask any questions. We're just going to have a red carpet. Come over to the United Kingdom. We want you. So what's happening is we are creating the talent. We are giving them the skills. We are giving them all of the secret sauce that makes America so wonderful. And then we're saying, well, we're not going to let you stay here anymore. But other countries might want you, and other countries are doing that. So if we think about the future of America, where are we going to be in 10 years? And, one of the things that I have advocated for throughout my career is a visa for startup founders. We specifically do not have that category. And that's what, I've written a number of books on this issue and, written about it, talked about it. It's sort of like my pet cause, if you like, that I have clients who are incredibly talented founders, but they can't often stay here. How can we do that? And Canada, keeping with that example, they took our first bill that we had in Congress and they tweaked it to make it their own. And now it's one of the most successful destinations for founders.
Yeah. And all of that's just nuts in my mind. How are we just giving away all of that wonderful talent? Not just like letting it leave, but we like literally don't want it. Like that's what we're saying is we don't want these people here. We're like shooing them out the door. We're like getting rid of them and sending them off to other places. And that's insane to me. So I think we have a lot to do to get our house in order here in the United States. Other countries are certainly benefiting from that. And I hope we can figure it out. Well, Tahmina, this has just really been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your time, your expertise that you shared with me and my audience. As we wrap things up for today, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then please give us the final word on the topic for today.
Well, I do want to add that even though our laws are essentially broken, I don't want to leave people with all doom and gloom. And it's important for people to know that the visa categories that we have do work still. So if you're a business owner, if you're a startup founder, just know that the visas that we have can still work. And so for years, while I've advocated for policy changes, my most recent book is a visa guide called U.S. Immigration Visa Guide for Startups and Founders, which will help businesses navigate the visa soup that we have to see which situation they are in and which visa category that would suit either them as founders or their employees. So no, it's possible. And anybody who's listening who might have been laid off, to them I say, think about how you can take immigration into your own hands. Can you have a business for yourself that can sponsor your visa and your immigration pathway? It is absolutely possible. And so I want to make sure people understand that the laws, even though they are broken, are still usable. Don't lose hope. And so you can contact me. I'm very active on LinkedIn at Tahmina Watson, but my website is www.watsonimmigrationlaw.com. I have a number of books on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, but I'd encourage people to look at the visa guidebook. It's under the Startup Visa series. And John, I don't know if I mentioned earlier, I have a podcast too, a couple of them. One is called Tahmina Talks Immigration, and the other one is the Startup Visa. So there is no way you can, miss me. If you Google me, I'll come up in many different ways, and I'd love to connect.
Thank you so much, Tahmina. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate you ending it on a positive note, and I really encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Tahmina can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great